Two of my favorite people are with us today. Let me introduce them now. James Pawelski. Dr. James Pawelski is Director of Education and Senior Scholar in the Positive Psychology Center and Adjunct Associate Professor of Religious Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania. He is the founding director of the University of Pennsylvania Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. I actually had the chance to study with Dr. Pawelski in that program the first year. He's the author of The Dynamic Individualism of William James and a co-editor of the Eudaimonic Turn, Well-Being and Literary Studies, and the co-editor of On Human Flourishing, an anthology of poems. I have to tell you that probably the most exciting thing to share with you is that he is also the founding executive director of the International Positive Psychology Association. James Pawelski, welcome back to the Positive Psychology Leader Series.
Thank you so much, David. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you, and no doubt on the 30th episode. So thanks for being here.
So, David, I was just thinking back. I mean, I can't believe it's been 30 of these, and the range of speakers that we've had, the fascinating science that's been presented, the great ideas for application of that science, and you, my friend, have been at the helm the entire time. So I just want to give you a big gold star and a huge word of thanks from all of us in the International Positive Psychology Association for your volunteer service and being such a great host and welcoming voice and presence throughout the series. Thank you.
James, I really appreciate that. You're kind, and I appreciate every single word. It's been a pleasure. And you've been along for the ride the entire time as well, so that's made it quite a joy. And I say that to everyone in positive psychology out there, to be in a part of a community like we are here with IPA is really quite special. Speaking of which, there's another individual who's been with us since the beginning. Her name is Barbara Fredrickson. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson has been advancing the science of positive emotions for more than 20 years. She is currently Keenan Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she directs the PEP Lab, which is for positive emotions, I'm going to actually ask Barb to say PEP is Positive Emotions Performance Lab?
Positive Emotions and Psychophysiology.
I'm glad I asked you so we could pronounce it correctly. And Psychophysiology Lab. And you can see that at positiveemotions.org. Barbara Fredrickson has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Her books, Positivity, came out in 2009, and Love 2.0 came out in 2013, have been translated into more than 20 languages around the world. She has really received every award that you can imagine. Her parents are very proud, as are we, including the Christopher Peterson. It's the inaugural Christopher Peterson Gold Medal from the International Positive Psychology Association. Barb's scientific work has influenced scholars and practitioners worldwide. She has been invited to present her research at the White House in the United States and for the Dalai Lama. And the biggest, once again, the biggest honor of all is she is the president of the International Positive Psychology Association. Barb, welcome back to the Positive Psychology Leader Series.
Well, thank you, David. You make me smile with your creative way to do these introductions.
Thank you very much. A lot to work with, that's for sure. So let's do this. Before we turn it over to you, Barb, for your presentation, let's share a couple announcements, and one of them is a real big one that I'm excited about. So let me turn it over to you, James, and to Barb.
Great. Thanks, David. First of all, a couple of announcements about divisions. So I'm sure most of those folks on the call will know that we've had really exciting developments with divisions, especially in the last couple of years, although our student division has been around for much longer than that. But the first announcement is about one of our newer divisions, the Work and Organizations division. They're just doing all kinds of really interesting things as they get launched. And one of the things is that they have come up with a new publication. So this is, they've just published their first issue of their publication, Positive Work and Organizations, Research and Practice. So this publication creates a space for members around the world to share their knowledge and their experience, including empirical and conceptual scholarship, literature reviews, philosophical commentaries, evidence-based discussions on various issues in the field. So the inaugural issue is currently accessible on our website. If you go to ipanetwork.org and go on the divisions tab, you'll see the Work and Organizations division. Will be able to access that publication there. Really encourage you to take a look at it. It's fantastic. The next issue is due out in March, so they're going to be continuing to roll these out in a regular fashion. So we look forward to that. So thanks to all the folks in the Work and Organization division who are making this happen. The second announcement is also has to do with divisions. This is the SIPA, the student division. And they're going to launch a pilot of their own student speaker series next week. So SIPA Student Speaker Series will celebrate the student experience and perspective, and they'll bring live online interviews and presentations with students who are making an impact in the field of positive psychology. The first webinar will be on the topic of excellence in teaching. So for all the students on the call, I highly recommend you take part in the SIPA Student Speaker Series. You can go to the website, again, for more information about that. All right, and that brings us to our third announcement. So if we could have the drum roll, please. Here we go. This has to do with World Congresses. So I have a question. Those of you who are on the call, how many of you attended the 4th World Congress in Florida last July? Please raise, or June rather, please raise your hands. Okay, well, that's a lot of hands going up, David. I can't quite see all of them, but that's great. That's right. We had some 1,200 people from more than 50 countries in attendance, and it was a great time to share research and evidence-based practice. And so we have been hard at work to find a great location for the 5th World Congress. That will take place in, well, let's see, a year and a half from now, so in 2017. And the first thing I want to announce is that we are delighted that we have a Congress chair. And that Congress chair is actually on this call. Barbara Fredrickson has stepped in and been willing to take on this great responsibility of making sure to bring in the speakers and oversee the development of the program. And she's already done some really fantastic work to help make this our most innovative, creative, exciting, science-filled, practice-oriented Congress. So I'm really excited about that.
Awesome.
And we have the location for where the 5th World Congress is going to be. It's going to be in Montreal, Canada. And so there we have a picture of the place where we're going to hold it. The convention center in Montreal is so colorful. As is indeed the entire city. And so it's going to be July 13 through 16, 2017 in Montreal, Canada. So please save the date, mark your calendars now to join us for what promises to be an extraordinary event. We're delighted to be able to be in Canada now for the first time, and I'm really looking forward to that. Barb, I'm really excited. First of all, thank you so much for your leadership in the Positive Psychology Association, including taking on the role of Congress Chair. I'm really excited about our meeting in Montreal.
Oh yeah, me too. I'm especially excited that I get to practice my French. It's a francophone city, and you really feel that international, spirit in the city. It's a vibrant city, lots of great food, and I'm really excited because it's our 10-year anniversary for IPA with the 17th World Congress. So we'll be celebrating 10 years, and it'll be a great place to do that. So I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in Montreal that year. Of course, we may see each other before then, but especially then.
Absolutely. So, Barb, you and I went to Montreal to do a site visit last month, and we're so impressed by, again, the convention center, the city, the vibe, the internationality of it. And, David, here's an interesting fact. Montreal was founded 365 years before IPA was.
Wow.
I mean, talk about
IPA was first.
Well, I know. We almost
no, that's
were first.
Incredible.
I just think it was so kind and thoughtful of the city of Montreal to time its founding so that they're going to be celebrating their 375th anniversary when we're celebrating our 10th anniversary. So they're going to have all kinds of great cultural events actually in the city at the time, all summer long, and at the time we're going to be there. So that'll add another layer of excitement as well.
Yeah, that is really awesome. That is tremendous. And I encourage everyone really on the call, if you haven't been to a Congress, you don't want to miss it. You really want to plan ahead for it, budget, time, everything, because it's just an incredible way to meet people up front and close, like Dr. Pawelski and like Dr. Fredrickson and so many other leaders in the world, and a chance to make some really good friends. So, and one other thing I'll just mention, and then we're going to turn it over to you, Barb, and that is, if you do join the organization, there is a significant discount on the Congress event, and so keep that in mind when you're thinking about joining the program. And we'd, of course, love to have you. So we have our producer, Jenny Brennan, behind the scenes is working on, we're going to be switching over presentations here. But we're going to turn it now to Barb, and we're going to talk about the role of spontaneous positive thoughts in the pursuit of passions and wellness behaviors. And with that, Barb, you are up, and thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I'm happy to share some really recent work coming out of the PEP lab, and I'm just a little aware that I'm calling in for this webinar from home, and my cat is right behind my office door meowing, and I'm hopeful that that's not too much of a distraction. So if you hear my sweet pet, just know that he's having his own positive, spontaneous thoughts, probably about where are you? But anyway, here we go. I want to share with you again, this is real recent work coming out of my lab, and I want to give a shout out to all the members of my lab and the funding sources that help us hum along. But I especially want to call out Elise Rice, because Elise is really the mastermind behind this whole line of work on positive, spontaneous thoughts. As an undergraduate, she had studied intrusive thoughts, a very rich area within cognitive and clinical psychology, and began to wonder, well, what about those thoughts that don't feel like an intrusion, but they're enjoyable and positive, and what can we learn from them? And strikingly, there had been almost zero research on positive, spontaneous thoughts, and so she is really the person who has launched this whole area, and is in the midst of completing her dissertation on these topics. What I'm going to share with you is some of her earlier work, pre-dissertation work, and how they relate to passions and wellness behaviors more generally. So anyway, there's Elisa's smiling face for you, so you can get a sense of the scientist behind some of the data. So this fits into a larger theoretical model, which I suspect some of you have heard me speak about, at least on one occasion. This is the upward spiral theory of lifestyle change, was something that I featured in my talk at the last World Congress in Orlando. So I want to just give a little bit of background sketch of this theory so that you can see where the work on positive spontaneous thoughts fits into the theory. And so key aspects of the upward spiral theory are that it's rooted equally in neuroscience and in the broaden and build theory. And the broaden and build theory, I'm sure many of you are perhaps overly familiar with, but is the perspective on positive emotions that I've been working with for decades now, and is summarized in my books. But the key things you need to know about broaden and build for this presentation is that positive emotions tend to have two different effects within human psychology. One effect is an effect that happens in the very moment that we experience positive emotions. They broaden our awareness. And the implications of that broadened awareness is that little by little, over time, in the long run, more moments of broadened awareness help build our resources, build our resilience, build our social connectedness, and more generally help us become better versions of ourselves. So that's kind of the architecture of the broaden and build theory, and it's an insight about, describes the form and function of positive emotions more generally. And how those ideas of the broaden and build theory are joined up with some discoveries from the neuroscience of addiction and sickness behavior. Those are two areas of neuroscience that have inspired my thinking about this upward spiral theory. From the neuroscience of addiction, I draw this concept of looking at the distinction between liking something and wanting it. That's a distinction that comes out of research, animal research, much of it done by my former colleague at Michigan, Kent Berridge. And what we know is that liking something and wanting it are very separable psychological constructs that have previously just been lumped together as reward, but now we understand that they are distinct, and that wanting in particular is preceded by a concept called incentive salience that I'll unpack a little bit more later, but that is that the cues, the people and objects that have been associated with a past pleasurable activity come to really loom large in our perception and pop out and draw our attention. And this accounts for the fact that, people who have abused certain drugs, in particular cocaine is one example, that even when they decide, I don't want to use this drug anymore, the people and objects just unbiddenly kind of lead to very intense cravings. I think we can learn from the science of addiction about how the positive emotion system works, because addiction is about hijacking that positive emotion system and kind of overstimulating it. But the lessons to be learned from that research are not simply about addiction and recovery. They're also about how positive emotions motivate behavior, even in normal, well-functioning situations. There's a separate literature about sickness behavior. So I'm sure maybe some of you, hopefully not too many of you, have a recent experience where you kind of feel like this woman over here, where you just, you don't want to see anybody, you don't want to be active, you just want to kind of hunker down at home and pull up the covers and get over whatever illness you're experiencing. And what we know from research is that this feeling, like you don't want to be with people, you don't want to be active, is a product of inflammation, acute inflammation. So inflammation in the body has its own psychology, and it functions to, in effect, turn down the volume on the positive emotion system so that things that are normally rewarding to you actually end up seeming kind of flat and not rewarding. And so, there's work to show that inflammation in the body can actually dampen reward circuits in the brain, again, reflecting that anhedonia or lack of positive affect. So the insight that I had from the sickness behaviors work is that, the flip side of these sickness behaviors, not wanting to be with people, not wanting to be physically active, you might describe as wellness behaviors. And I've listed a few of them here: being physically active, being social, learning something new, pursuing something meaningful, eating well, caring for the body. These are all actions that you take when you know you have a future. Sickness behavior is hunkering down, just trying to get through the moment. It's you're not really thinking about your future time horizons or trying to be well to be a contribution in the future. Wellness behaviors are really, what we engage in when we know we have a future that we need to plan for. And my insight here was that biological systems, perhaps inflammation, perhaps other aspects of our biological milieu, like heart rate variability, may also amplify positive emotions, kind of turning up the volume on the positive emotion systems in ways that make wellness behaviors increasingly appealing over time. So that, sometimes wellness behaviors really grab you and you're like, oh, I got to do that. And other times, they seem less enticing. And that could hinge on the current state of our physical health. And so this little red thing here is my little symbol of amplification, which you'll see on the next, in a moment, you'll see on the next slide. This build here is just to remind me to say that we've already seen evidence of this, that biological systems amplify the positive emotions with a variable that we have tested a lot of in my lab is heart rate variability as an index of cardiac vagal tone. This is a way to measure sort of the strength of people's parasympathetic nervous systems. And what we found is that, people's start of a study levels of cardiac vagal tone predict the degree to which they get positive emotions out of a number of wellness behaviors. We've seen it with being social and with meditation, which could be either learning something new or pursuing something meaningful. And so people's starting of the study levels of cardiac vagal tone predict how much joy they get out of those behaviors. And so the upward spiral theory of lifestyle change is something that has been guiding much of my current work funded by NIH. The overarching hypothesis of the theory is that positive emotions create non-conscious and increasing motives for wellness behaviors. This non-conscious part is reflecting the neuroscience of addiction that talks about the dopaminergic system increasing the reward value of cues associated with past enjoyment, and increasing as we build resources or biological resources that might turn up the volume on the positive emotion system. We may be more inspired to be physically active, socially connected, pursue meaningful activities, taking care of the body. So here's the outline of the theory. To the extent that a wellness behavior produces positive emotions, and I just want to pause at this moment and say that I do not believe that all wellness behaviors produce positive emotions. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we just do it and we, go to the gym even though we're not excited about it and doing some kind of exercise routine that really doesn't lead to much enjoyment, but we think it's going to have some other benefits for us. So sometimes wellness behaviors are neutral or even grim, but in the case when they do produce positive emotions, other psychological processes take root. And one piece of that is that those positive emotions, because they're pleasant, produce non-conscious motives that inspire us to engage in effortful behavior to reenact that wellness behavior. Now, this is an aspect of the upward spiral theory that where positive emotions and pleasures may function similarly, and this is kind of the loop that people are in when they're addicted to things. So what separates wellness behaviors from addictions is the second loop of the upward spiral theory, which is the broaden and build loop, is that one place where positive emotions, I'm theorizing, are distinct from physical pleasures is that positive emotions broaden awareness and build resources. And some of the resources, some of the ways positive emotions help bring out the best in us, some of those ways bend back and amplify this connection. And we've seen this again with when positive emotions help build cardiac vagal tone, for instance, that cardiac vagal tone predicts the degree to which people get positive emotions out of enacting that behavior. So this is the broader theory as a backdrop that I've been working on for the last couple of years, and has been sort of in the background as Elise Rice has pursued her research on positive spontaneous thoughts. And so I wanted to just get that architecture out there because you'll see some of these links again in that research. So positive spontaneous thoughts. What are they? Well, we all have the experience of just, something popping to our mind without any conscious intention. Okay, so Homer Simpson thinks about donuts and sleep and Duff beer. And, probably a lot of these things have to do with, the things in his environment that capture his attention the most. I should say that Elise would probably never use this Homer Simpson slide. This is my addition. And sometimes what we think is deliberate as we're trying to solve a problem. We're deliberately focusing on something. And sometimes what we think, are just ideas that pop into our mind unintentionally. It turns out that people tend to put more credibility in their spontaneous thoughts than their deliberate thoughts. It's sort of like this idea, well, if this is always on my mind, it must be something important. So people take their spontaneous thoughts to be consequential and important. And one of the things that Elise was inspired by early on is Bob Velleran's work on the dualistic model of passions. And I know some of you may be familiar with this, but the key thing that is relevant to the work that we're doing is that Bob argues that passions come in multiple shades or there are multiple aspects to our passions. A passion is a favorite activity that we invest a lot of our time in and we see as important to the self. And Bob's point is that passions can be harmonious or in balance with the rest of our lives, that, or they could be obsessive, where we just pursue that passion regardless of whether it's good for us or bad for us in the moment. So, somebody who's going out for a run and, managing their other responsibilities in life, that's what kind of an example of a harmonious passion, not letting their passion for running getting in the way of anything else. And a person who is obsessively passionate will run no matter what, even if it's a hurricane, or there's ice on the roads that could be dangerous, or that sense that the passion is going to be enacted no matter what the conditions of the moment support. So a few key things about past work on passions from Bob's research program is that harmonious passions are more likely to be associated with positive emotions, whereas obsessive passions are more likely to be associated with a mix of negative and positive emotions. And harmonious passions, the degree to which somebody's passion is harmonious versus obsessive. It's like any of our passions can have elements, some strand of a harmonious quality and some strand of an obsessive quality. So the degree to which our passions have harmonious qualities predicts well-being, psychological well-being, whereas obsessive passions don't necessarily predict well-being. They may help us to be the absolute best in the world, like someone who's competing at an international level might really benefit from having an obsessive passion. But in terms of psychological wellness, not so much. So let me tell you how Elise began studying passions and positive spontaneous thoughts together. And this is work that is newly in press at Cognitive Therapy and Research and should be appearing before too long. And this is a study where, this was a survey study done with Amazon MTurk workers. We had 170 of them. And what we did was ask people about their favorite activities and also about the frequency of their spontaneous thoughts about their favorite activity, and then later thinking of their favorite activity, filled out the survey, the questionnaire that Bob Velleran and his colleagues have developed to measure the harmonious tendencies of a favorite activity or the obsessive tendencies. And we found that both harmonious and obsessive passions predict how frequently thoughts about your favorite activity pop into mind. And so it's true for both kinds of passions that they tend to be on our minds a lot, What seems to be uniquely true for harmonious passions is that the spontaneous thoughts that come to mind about favorite activities that we have harmonious relationships to tend to be more pleasant. People would evaluate or rate that most of their thoughts about harmonious passions tend to be positive. So here's a way in which we're kind of replicating that finding of the link between positivity and harmonious passion, but we're seeing that it's coloring the nature of those thoughts. And as I get to later studies, I'll be able to share with you what are the consequences of these thoughts being positive. But the first study was just simply descriptive. Do positive spontaneous thoughts tend to travel with harmonious passions? And yes, they do. So I want to tell you about a second study, which is a larger study, 232 midlife adults, and we got different survey assessments of them, but in particular, we studied them over 14 days as they lived their lives as normal. And what we did here in this study is we kind of limited them to think about physical activity. Rather than asking for their favorite activity in general, we asked them to think about a physical activity or form of exercise that they cherished, that they really enjoyed. And we measured the degree, again, using Valeron and colleagues measured the degree to which they were harmoniously passionate or obsessively passionate about this cherished activity. And we also measured, how often do thoughts about that physical activity pop into mind and so on. So we find, replicating the association between harmonious passions and the positivity of spontaneous thoughts, we see that again in the domain of physical activity. And we also find that over these 14 days where we're asking people, did you engage in physical activity today? And if so, for how long? We find that the positive spontaneous thoughts that people have about physical activity account for or explain, or in statistical terms, mediate the correlation between harmonious passion for that physical activity and the degree to which people actually engage in that behavior. So harmonious passion is a psychological kind of orientation or relationship to that behavior. It predicts whether people are more likely to engage in that behavior, but the psychological kind of active ingredient there are these positive spontaneous thoughts. And again, if people take their positive spontaneous thoughts to be particularly meaningful, they could be serving as sort of impromptu nudges for people to, hey, I gotta go do that favorite activity or be active because my mind is reminding me to. So again, just linking this to the upward spiral theory of lifestyle change, just to give you visuals to anchor the findings that I've shared with you so far. If you're passionate about something like swimming, you're more likely to enjoy when you swim, especially if you have a harmonious passion for swimming, you're more likely to enjoy it. The more you enjoy it, you're more likely to have, positive spontaneous thoughts about them. I think of this as sort of like as if, the people and objects associated with your favorite activity, your swimming, your love of swimming they kind of pop out in the environment as if they're covered in glitter dust. And that's those sort of positive, alluring thoughts drive you to the pool more often so that you stay engaged with your favorite activity. And so positive spontaneous thoughts can help us understand part of the motivation for behavioral engagement in things that we want to be sustained in our engagement with. So I want to share with you, I know this slide looks really busy, but in the same study, I mentioned before that harmonious passion over here in Bob Valeron's work is linked with well-being. Okay, so people are more likely to experience higher levels of well-being if they have harmonious passion relative to obsessive passion. And we find that again here, that harmonious passion predicts well-being, whereas obsessive passion does not. We measured well-being as satisfaction with life, meaning in life, and flourishing. We found that that connection between harmonious passion and well-being is in part accounted for by the positivity of people's spontaneous thoughts. So again, the reason that harmonious passion buoys up our well-being is because it's always on our mind. Those harmonious passions are always on their mind, and they're populating our mind with pleasant thoughts. And that, again, is associated with the frequency of physical activity, as I showed on the past slide, and also with a lower likelihood, negative association with depressive symptoms. So there are mental health benefits and physical health benefits that follow from the positivity of our spontaneous thoughts. Another study I want to share with you is an experimental study where Elise Rice was trying to get a handle on the causal direction between harmonious passions and positive spontaneous thoughts. And to do this, we had a study of 96 MTurk workers. After they named a favorite activity, we randomized them to one of three conditions. One where we tried to get them to emphasize the harmonious nature of their passion, the obsessive nature of their passion, or a control condition where they just wrote about something else, like checking a book out of the library or something. And again, because any of our favorite activities can have elements of harmoniousness or obsessiveness to them, by having people focus on one or the other, you can kind of bend that passion into be more harmonious or more obsessive. And so we wanted to see if we did that, would we affect the degree to which people's spontaneous thoughts would be positive? Again, trying to find, as a scientist, to figure out, is this causing, is the quality of our passion causing our spontaneous thoughts to be more positive or not? So right after they did that, there was a 3-minute thought listing task where people, don't try to think about anything in particular, but at the same time they record all of their thoughts. And right after each thought that they mention, they rate the degree to which that tended to just pop into mind, be spontaneous, or they deliberately tried to have that thought. And then later, after they do the thought listing test, they go back to each thought and rate the affective valence of it. So in this study, I just want to show two different things: the overall frequency of automatic thoughts across those three study conditions, one where we had people write about something else, where they wrote about the harmonious qualities or the obsessive qualities. We find that the frequency of spontaneous thoughts about the favorite activity are higher for the two passion groups than for the control group, but they don't differ between these two groups. And that's actually what we expected. The frequency of these thoughts is going to be just track the fact that they are passions. What we especially predicted was that if we had people focus on the harmonious nature of their thoughts, they would have more positive spontaneous thoughts than if we had them focus on the obsessive nature of those passions. And the control group in this study kind of fell between these two and wasn't statistically different from either group, but these two were different from each other. The next two studies I know are very similar, so I'm going to basically describe one and then share with you that the second study basically supports the same findings in a different context. So although there's two more studies that can be really pretty quick. This is a study where we wanted to look at longitudinal relationships over time. So we got a sample of students. They took a survey of these two different types of passion, positive spontaneous thoughts, and they did the same survey 3 times at 2-week intervals. And this allowed us to assess, how do harmonious passions change over time? How does people's propensity to have positive spontaneous thoughts change over time. And what we found was that the degree to which people have positive spontaneous thoughts about a favorite activity predicts increases in harmonious passion over time. And again, this is why positive spontaneous thoughts are consequential, because they forecast the growth or the building of harmonious passions. We find the reciprocal connection is also true, that the degree to which our passions are harmonious predicts increases over time in the degree to which our spontaneous thoughts are positive. So this is a reciprocal loop here. We find no similar effects with obsessive passion, and we find no similar effect with the overall frequency of spontaneous thoughts. So the real psychological action here, the real motivator, is the positivity of spontaneous thoughts, not just that we're having spontaneous thoughts. So it's the valence that really seems to drive this. Study 5 is almost identical to the other ones, also student sample. The difference is they, instead of talking about a favorite activity, they talked about a favorite person, their romantic partner or the person they had a crush on. And they filled out these measures 3 times at 4-week intervals. That was the one difference. But the structure of the findings was exactly the same. That positive spontaneous thoughts predicted increases over time in our harmonious passion for that person. And Bob Valeron has a whole line of research about how our passions for others and our romantic partners can be either obsessive or harmonious. And we found that harmonious, the degree to which our passions for the other are harmonious, predicts increases over time in positive spontaneous thoughts. We found no similar effect for obsessive passion and no similar effect for the overall frequency of spontaneous thoughts. So just to recap those findings, harmonious passions amplify the positivity of wellness behaviors. We know that from existing research from Valeron's lab, but also that so the more we're passionate about an activity, the more positive emotion we get from that activity, and we've replicated that finding as well. But there's also a way in which these positive spontaneous thoughts contribute to an increase in harmonious passion, which again helps us get more joy out of the activity that we're passionate about. So there's a way in which these positive spontaneous thoughts are really serving as the non-conscious motive or the incentive salience that doesn't just reflect that we like our favorite activities. It actually gets us busy planning and making sure that we engage in our favorite activities more often. So one of the things I wanted to just say before I thank you and thank Elise Rice again, but I'll let you take in Elise's face with these findings, because it's important, because this is very much identified work that you should credit her with. She and I have collaborated on this. You might think that, well, how can this be actionable? Because they're spontaneous thoughts. You can't control them. We can't design an intervention to go right for spontaneous thoughts. And what's interesting about it is that, we know when people try too hard to be positive, it backfires. I mean, this is the work about excessively valuing happiness. But if we create environments that are associated with cues that and mementos that reflect past positive experiences, the more we surround ourselves with cues associated with past positive experiences, the more likely we are to have spontaneous positive thoughts about similar activities. So if you really enjoy hiking, having a couple of pictures of great hikes that you've been on in your environment, or keeping your hiking shoes readily within view, I mean, all those things can actually seed whether you have these positive thoughts more often. But also just making sure that you enjoy your wellness behaviors is a way to kind of plant seeds for positive, spontaneous thoughts arising. So again, it really underlines the importance of keeping enjoyment as an important thread within the health habits that we want so much to adopt, but sometimes have trouble sticking with. So with that, I would love to just, thank you guys for your kind attention. Open the next 10 minutes up to questions and, see where that leads us.
Awesome. Hey, Barb, thank you so much for your presentation. Brings me back to 2004, when I first heard you present, and I just got all excited and started walking around because I said, this is what we all need, a better understanding of the power of positive emotions and now spontaneous positive thoughts. So thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and so let's take some. You ready for some questions?
Sure.
All right. So we've got a whole bunch of people, and a lot of people just saying thanks for the presentation. But here's one from. This is from Rachel Green from Western Australia, and she says, "How do you differentiate between spontaneous positive thoughts from positive spontaneous emotions?"
Yeah. Well, I think they're potentially closely related. That's a great question. But the positive spontaneous thoughts probably do come with a little bit of affective valence, but I would think they're more mood boosters than fully specific positive emotions. Now, from a theoretical perspective, most affective scientists would distinguish between moods and emotions, and one of the big distinctions is that emotions are about something in particular, like something, some activity that you're engaging in, or some very specific thought that is, like thinking of something as a blessing, brings gratitude. Now, those are, sometimes you could have a positive thought that, is rather mild. You wouldn't think of it as necessarily like, oh, I'm having a big emotional moment. And yet, I want to, just emphasize that the line between a valenced thought and an emotion is very dim. I mean, it's murky. And the key thing is that, we're really focusing on the content of the thought, and then people judge whether that thought, was mostly pleasant or mostly unpleasant. So there's a long tradition within clinical psychology of looking at intrusive thoughts and ruminations. And, as a process, those kinds of thoughts are considered to be something that triggers emotions, but it's not one and the same as emotion. So it's a murky line, and it's in many ways you could recast this as spontaneous emotions, although you'd then say, well, where do those come from? Well, it comes from the thought. So it's what comes first.
Yeah, that's great. And just on that note, Nikki Glantz from Hanover, New Hampshire, she asked the question, has research been done regarding the possibility that spontaneous thoughts emanate from unconscious levels?
Oh, yeah. We haven't. We theorize them to be the products of unconscious or non-conscious motivation, to be the product of automatic cognitive processes. Although we don't, we haven't designed our studies around that. The way I think of them as they are non-conscious motives, kind of that are operating, under the surface, that kind of break through the surface of consciousness. So the non-conscious motives or incentive salience that comes out of this is a concept that comes out of addiction research. Argues that it's not an explicit thought that you're thinking, oh, I see the drug paraphernalia, and that inspires me to want to use my drug again, that is not a product of, explicit thinking, that just seeing those cues triggers urges and cravings. And so that's a non-conscious process. It's an implicit process. We think that these spontaneous thoughts are kind of a readout of these implicit processes. It's like when they're so salient that it breaks through into conscious awareness. So yes, I do theoretically think that they arise from non-conscious processes, but we haven't designed our studies to test that particular hypothesis per se. We've more looked at, how they function, what value do they hold for mental health, for physical health, for behavioral engagement, and so on. It's a great question.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, right. Good question. Thank you, Nikki, for the question. We have a question from Puerto Rico, from Raul Torres, and his question is to you, Barb. What other physiological correlates besides cardiac vagal tone exist to assess how positive emotions influence wellness behaviors and or vice versa? That's a good question, a long question.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we've been looking at is spontaneous facial expressions, so measured through facial electromyography or sensors placed on the face, especially on the cheek muscles that raise the lip corners and the muscles around the eye that lead to the crow's feet wrinkles, and to see how those relate to the positivity of spontaneous thoughts. And we have yet to look at other physiological markers with this measure, but we have just completed a very large study where we have all kinds of biological measures and measures of positive spontaneous thoughts. So as we dig into that data set, we may be able to learn more. So stay tuned.
That's awesome. Another question comes in from Dan Diamond. He asks about, you say a little bit more about how obsessive passions could be converted to harmonious passions? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, well, again, I think the important thing, when people hear that there are two kinds of passions, they think that, they can immediately, await a diagnosis for which one do I have or which one does other people have. And I just want to emphasize again that they are, not mutually exclusive. We can have one or the other. And so by, thinking about how our favorite activity is in balance with the rest of our lives and thinking, and explicitly trying to create that balance is probably a way to increase our harmonious tendencies. And just recognizing, what are the signs of obsessive qualities? Well, do you engage in that passion? Like if you're passionate about playing music and you have a big test the next day, maybe you're taking the bar exam, do you go out and jam with your friends the night before? Or are you preparing for the exam or what? Do you know what I mean? So do you, engage in your favorite activity no matter what, even if, prudence would say, yeah, something else. So, just being aware of those elements of obsessive and harmonious and being mindfully aware when they're showing up and just trying to create more of one than the other. But, Bob Valoran's work is really brilliant. I suggest it's very well worth reading.
Yeah, his work is fantastic, and he happens to be a phenomenal guy as well.
Yeah.
Like you are a phenomenal gal. So here's another question, and we've got a request in. We normally don't do this, Barb, but a request for about 5 extra minutes. Is your schedule allow that?
I could do that if people want to stay on the line. Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll do 5 extra minutes. So for those of you who've been knocking on my door saying, boy, could we do 5 more minutes? That's the gift has been given. Here's a question then from Jeremy House. And his question is, what else has been found to mediate the amount of positive spontaneous thoughts one has? Does practicing mindfulness contribute to more positive spontaneous thoughts, for instance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And again, with the data set that we've just collected, we'll be able to answer that question. I hadn't thought of, looking at it in the exact same way. But I'm also very interested in the degree to which concepts that I've spoken about at the last IPA, prioritizing positivity. This is work of one of my former students, Dr. Lana Canalino. it's basically individual differences in how much how likely we are to put pleasant activities on our to-do list each day versus not. And I think that is likely to be related to the degree to which people have positive spontaneous thoughts. But and we have again just completed a large data set of like 240 midlife adults over 18 months, where we have some lovely densely repeated longitudinal data where we'll be able to answer some of these questions. So I'm really excited to be able to dig in.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. I have a question from Jenny Oman, and she is looking at the workplace. And her question to you, Barb, is how is this work possible to introduce to the workplace, and how could it be useful in a work situation?
You know, I think it's an interesting idea. I think the place to intervene or to think about in terms of workplaces and teamwork would be in, you know, more generally what the upward spiral theory of lifestyle change and the broaden and build theory would suggest is, you know, those places where we're interjecting positive activities or positive emotions into ordinary work aspects. You know, we can sometimes think of those moments as sort of a break in the real action that, you know, oh, well, normally we're supposed to be doing our work, but now we're having fun, you know, and that's, you know, a lot of times we trivialize it. We don't think of it as consequential. And what this work shows is that it's extraordinarily consequential. It may be what binds us to our coworkers, our teammates, and makes us feel loyal. I mean, think of that last study where we looked at positive spontaneous thoughts about romantic partners or a crush. You could think of that working the same way in terms of you know, building bonds with coworkers. The more enjoyment as part of the work process, or the, you know, getting to know each other, or team building process, the more you know, we're likely to be thinking about the other and potentially in a more altruistic or pro-social or task enabling sort of way, to use a Jane Dutton term. So it just gives another lens on how we can use the psychological properties or powers of positive emotions to you know, energize and strengthen and fortify our work process and our work teams.
That's tremendous. Really, and just got another note from Marcia, who said that she appreciated your question, your answer on the workplace front. So that's great. David Karn asked a question, and we're cruising in on our final couple questions. David Karn from the United Kingdom asks, can positive spontaneous thoughts, this is sort of related to the meditation question, can positive spontaneous thoughts be deepened if they are savored or focused in on the practice of gratitude? And does that enhance the impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's, you know, another person's dissertation.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, does bringing attention to the positive spontaneous thought make a difference? There's some research out of my lab that would suggest that is the case, that to the extent to which people score high on savoring, their mindfulness has a bigger well-being consequence, and vice versa. You know, that savoring and mindfulness build on one another. So savoring these positive thoughts, I think, is a way to amplify their impact.
That's awesome.
But again, studies have to be designed and run on that to test that. I think that would be a great dissertation.
Yeah, and that's what's exciting about IPA, that we have so many people that get to hear these opportunities for further research, and that's what, of course, we're promoting. Let's get more research on all of this, so that's great. So, Barb, here's a question that is sort of a mashup of a number of people's questions, and that is, you had the ear of the Dalai Lama, and this is our final question. This is your final question. You had the ear of the Dalai Lama. You were invited to the White House. what is it that you most want to save the world if given that opportunity again to spread a message that would, you think is most important for people to hear?
Right. Well, I think that, a lot of times we think of emotions as just, raining down on us like the weather. I think we need to know and share with others that we have so much more control about what we feel and when, and what others feel than we give credit for. And our efforts to instill joy and instill gratitude and inspire and be inspired are so consequential for the world that we inhabit next season and next year and next generations, that we should never trivialize the emotional tone and how we can contribute to making it more positive.
Wow. So we're next stop after the president of the International Positive Psychology Association, we're going to send you to the United Nations.
Well, that's we need everybody for these roles. So I just everybody on the call, everybody in IPA makes a big difference in the ways you carry this forward in the world.
Yeah, that's for sure. And we'll end on that note. I want to thank you, Barb, for the time and for kicking off our year in the Positive Psychology Leader Series. Thank you. Really, it's been great.
Oh, you're most welcome. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thank you to Dr. James Pawelski, who is our executive director and works tirelessly behind the scenes with Barb and other board members, and he's just a great guy as well. I want to also thank our producer of our series, Jenny Brennan, who works very hard to pull everything together, and she's just a delight as well. And Sydney Rubin is our technical and social media director, and she is also top-notch and a pleasure to work with. I want to thank all of you again for joining us. Thanks for staying a couple minutes late. I want to thank particularly folks who are up super early in the morning to be on this call, or people who are up really late. Whatever it is, whatever you're doing, we appreciate you making yourself available. So wherever you are in the world, thank you for making a difference through your work in positive psychology. Goodbye, and we'll catch you next month. Thanks so much.